Welcome once again to this self-knowledge course. Today we will be talking about infradimensions. This theme will give us many details about our inner darkness, which is where the light of our consciousness will come from when we begin to observe and eliminate each of our negative ways of being. Remember that in the conference in which we saw topics 5 and 6 of the course, we talked about the different dimensions of nature and where they are within us. Since by law of correspondence, as it is outside, so is inside. Since each one of us is a miniature cosmos. Hence the importance of knowing ourselves. If we want to be able to know and dominate the internal worlds of the planet, the solar system, the galaxy, and the universe, we must first know and govern our own internal world. And if we want to know the gods who move and regulate the universe, we must first know and develop our own inner divinity. So, the subject that we will see today is very important, since it will allow us to understand that just as it happens outside of us, on planet Earth, it happens in our inner world. That just as in the bowels of the planet, under the epidermis of the Earth, there are the external infradimensions, so it happens within us, we have our inner infradimensions. Let's start by understanding what an infradimension is. We had already explained that dimensions are levels of consciousness. Therefore, the higher dimensions correspond to levels of consciousness higher than this third dimension. Among these, the highest are the sixth and seventh. These are what is known as the heavens or the kingdom of heaven, which in us are at the level of the pituitary and the pineal gland. And when we talk about infradimensions, we are talking about levels of consciousness below this third dimension. Those are the second and first dimensions, also known as hell. But it's important to understand that even though our physical body is in this third dimension right now, our egoic psyche, all our psychological defects, inhabit these lower dimensions, and they are what keep us tied to the low levels of consciousness that we manage. Therefore, once our 108 opportunities as humans in a cycle have been exhausted, it is the psychological defects that inhabit our internal infradimensions, which condemn us to go through the involutionary process, in those infradimensions that are externally, under the surface of the earth. That is why this conference is so important, because in it, we are going to learn to identify and work with our own infradimensions, and we are going to understand that wisdom comes out of evil, that light comes out of darkness. Since light is trapped within each one of our psychological defects. And it is, in our lower abdomen, where the 7 doors that lead to the internal infradimensions, or our atomic hells, are found. There is where all the psychological defects that are part of our visible moon live. Because there is something that is important for us to understand, and that is that the solar part in us is our spirit, made up of the different parts of our inner being. While our ego is the lunar part in us. Thus, all human beings have 2 moons, or 2 aspects of ego. One is the visible moon, and the other is the hidden moon. The visible moon is related to our visible defects, and our own infradimensions. While our hidden moon is related to the causal selves, which are the seeds of our ego, or the heads of the legion, and with the infradimensions of planet Earth. So, the first work we must do is cleaning our visible moon, that is in our own infradimensions. Since 97% of our sexual creative energy is trapped in the various psychological elements that we have. So, we have to go down to our infradimensions, and we do this through the practice of psychological death, to rescue this energy to be able to make the different creations. The creation of our internal bodies. But there is something that is important for us to understand, and that is that everything in this world is dual, good and bad. Therefore, we have bad psychological defects or bad ways of being, and we have very good ways of being that are also psychological defects. But neither good nor evil is conscience. Only when we manage to extract the wisdom of that duality, work our good and bad defects, we will be able to reach that final understanding that is light. Believing ourselves good, or trying to be good will not make us conscious beings. Only when we are aware of our own darkness and manage to bring the light out of it, will we be truly conscious. So, when a being decides to voluntarily end all his defects, he must start a psychological war in daily life, working internally on all the psychological aggregates that emerge from his inner world. These eyes function by taking possession of the centers of the human machine, the sexual apparatus, and the sexual glands. By working on the psychological death, you would be doing the work of cleaning each infradimension, by eliminating all your psychological defects, and voluntarily rescuing all that trapped consciousness and wisdom. But, if we do not decide to do this psychological work voluntarily, in any of our 108 existences, we will have to go through the involution process, which we talked about in the last conference. Going through the infradimensions of planet Earth, where these psychological defects will be involuntarily and painfully disintegrated, while we go through the involutionary animal, vegetable, and mineral kingdoms. Thus losing the soul created in that cycle, and with it, the wisdom of that turn on the wheel. There, the importance of working on our infradimensions. Let's see this. Just as the infradimensions on planet Earth are subdivided into those 9 circles that Dante Alighieri showed in the Divine Comedy. In our internal infradimensions, we find the same 9 circles or spheres, which are the sphere of the Moon, Mercury, Venus, Sun, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. And in each of these spheres, there are certain types of psychological defects that are grouped by law of affinity within us. So, it is important that we understand that this exists within us, and that we must work on each of these defects to purify ourselves internally, free ourselves, and awaken our consciousness. And therefore, have the ability to raise our levels of consciousness. Because it is impossible to raise if we don't first work and eliminate what is heavy and grotesque in us. Let's study each of these spheres in which the infradimensions are subdivided, and the main defects found in each one. The first infradimension is the sphere of the Moon, related to the defect of laziness and those who have not been baptized. Also related to the planet Moon and the sexual center. This is showing us that the first work we must do is against our own laziness, since it does not let us start the work we must do in sex, and our inner work in general. The work of self-knowledge is about creating ourselves spiritually. But laziness prevents any creation, since it always leads us to do nothing, to spend our energy on idle things, and spend our whole lives pursuing things that are not really going to lead us to awaken our consciousness. We can find the defect of laziness within ourselves in its active or passive form, both of which seek to prevent creation. Laziness in its active form leads us to let ourselves be carried away by leisure, simply wasting time idly. While in his passive aspect, it leads us to be very diligent for everything, except for the things of our being, except for the awakening of consciousness. It is said that in this first circle are those who have not been baptized. But real baptism is not about taking a child and pouring water on its head. This is just a representation of what true baptism is, which is raising the waters towards the head, which is the symbolism of working with sexual transmutation, or spiritual birth. A person who is baptized is someone who eliminates the fornicating self, which is the defect that leads us to pour out our sexual energy for pleasure. Therefore, he who achieves baptism is the one who achieves chastity, and manages to raise his own spermatic waters vertebra by vertebra through his spine to the head. That is the deep meaning of baptism. Those who work on their laziness and manage to get baptized by raising their own waters to their heads through sexual transmutation, free themselves from the first infradimension, which is that of not creating. This infradimension is combated by doing. The second infradimension is the sphere of Mercury. It is related to our seminal waters and our instinctive center. In this circle are all our fornicating defects, those who do not value our waters, which is our sexual creative energy. We spend our time expelling these waters through ejaculation and orgasm. Humanity does not value sexual energy. We should reflect on this, and understand why this seminal fluid is so valuable, to realize that it is this fluid that will allow us to make all the internal creations that we want to do. And that it is precisely because of the value and power that this sexual fluid has, that in this wicked society we live in, there is so much promotion, and so many different ways, methods, and gimmicks, to make us want to pour out our sexual energy all the time. Moral values and principles have already been relaxed in such a way, that in schools they teach children to masturbate, initiating them from a young age, into that perverse vice of pouring out their sexual energy from the body. The pornography, the music, the dances. In reality, the sacredness of sexuality has been lost, and it has become an animal sexual practice. All our psychological defects are fed by fornication, because every time we pour out our sexual energy, we are feeding them, and creating more psychological defects. To work on this second infradimension, we need to eliminate the fornicating self. Thus, we will achieve chastity. For this, we must understand the value that our energy has, the power that it has, and what it represents. And we need to be radical with the defects of lust, to always be successful in the practice of suprasex. We must study all those defects that at every moment lead us to pour the sexual energy out of our body through orgasm and ejaculation. We need to work on all those fornication instincts and all those sensations that do not allow us to have control of our sexual organs, and we need to eliminate, with psychological death, the sensation of orgasm and ejaculation that is recorded in our instinctive center. So that in sexual practice, all those sensations do not make us fall. And we must analyze the damage that fornication in the practice sex, and through masturbation has generated us. Such as premature ejaculation, impotence, hypersensitivity, homosexuality, burning of brain neurons. Observe how it takes away our strength to face life, because we draw out our fire and our energy all the time. If we work on this inner infradimension, we will rescue the power and the energy to do the great work of our being. The third infradimension is the sphere of Venus. It is related to all our pleasures and desires and related to our emotional center. Here we find all our pleasures, such as the pleasure of eating, drinking, smoking, dancing, taking drugs, partying, working to have a lot of money, criticizing, falling in love, etc. All that we call pleasure, but that always ends in suffering. But there is something interesting to see here, and it is that in suffering we also have pleasure. The pleasure of crying, of complaining, and to be heard. Pleasure of telling our problems and the things that have happened to us, so that others know that things have gone very wrong for us, and that we have had a very bad time. And if we are sad, we put on sad songs to be sadder, and continue enjoying the pain. In short, we make pain a pleasure. And the problem with all these pleasures and sufferings is that they make us lose enormous amounts of energy. All those defects of partying, laughing, having vices, falling in love, disappointments, depressions, self-pity, feed here. In this circle we find the desire, who works as a psychological trainer, Lucifer, tempting and testing us. If we defeat him, we become masters of fire and light. If we don't defeat him, we become his slaves and we can never stop being what we are. All day long we have thousands of desires, desire to fight, to criticize, to eat, to smoke a cigarette, to watch pornography, to masturbate, to lie, to cry, etc. And when a desire is felt in the emotional center, it is like a fire. We must understand that desire is the source of all strength. With desire we have two options: refuse the desire, or surrender to it. Pleasure is just the bait that defects give us, which always turns out to be only a momentary pleasure, which ends up turning into pain. And we always fall for the same bait, because we don't realize that happiness is not in either of these two poles, pleasure and suffering, but it is in the center. In that conscious force that we recover by denying ourselves both. Denying ourselves to surrender our consciousness in exchange for pleasure, and denying ourselves to surrender our consciousness when suffering. The Buddha Gautama said that happiness is found in the absence of desire, and we, humanity, are confused thinking that we will find happiness by fulfilling our desires. But desire is a bottomless pit. It is never filled nor permanently satisfied. And so, we die without really finding true satisfaction or happiness. To work this third infradimension, we must learn to refuse each of our egoic desires, to recover the fire or energy to make our creations, and to recover the spirit and strength to do our inner work. That fire or spirit will allow us to meditate, to achieve conscious astral projections, to teach others, to practice suprasex, and to see progress in our inner work. Now, let's look at the fourth infradimension, which is the sphere of the sun. This is related to our imbalance. Also related to our lower intellectual center. This imbalance is generated in us by our wasteful defects and our hoarding defects. Both lead us to misery, since our imbalance always ends up turning us into beggars. Our wasteful defects always want to throw away all the external and internal wealth. Our wealth is our energy, our time, and money. We must understand the need to eliminate these defects that keep us unbalanced, and that lead us to material and spiritual misery. And we must observe our hoarding defects, which do not invest internal and external wealth. They keep it, they retain it, and prevent us from wisely invest it, doing what needs to be done, until the thief selves steal it. These defects make us beggars since they do not allow the construction of the existential bodies to be done. The fifth infradimension is the sphere of Mars. It is related to our motor center, which manages our deeds and words. Here we find the force, the good or bad use of it, and the defect of anger. Anger manifests itself in words, deeds, and omissions. Insulting, yelling, being rude, hitting, assaulting, ignoring someone, being sarcastic, or not helping others out of resentment. We have a lot of strength, but very poorly focused, since most of our strength is conditioned by anger. Here we find our willpower. To take the force out of anger, we must study all the details of the anger that manifest in us in our daily lives. And in order not to feed these defects, we must learn to change our way of reacting. We see that anger reacts very quickly. Someone offends us, blames us, or we feel afraid, and we react mechanically with anger, also when we feel frustrated, guilty, or doubtful. So, we must begin to apply the self-observation, to discover the things that trigger our anger, and stop it with psychological death. Asking our Divine Mother to eliminate the desire to react, and the internal cause that is triggering the anger at any given moment when we feel it. And we will see that if we do not react, the mind will try to convince us, telling us, you cannot let that person humiliate you, or ignore you, or disobey you. We also eliminate those defects talking in our mind, and don't react. And then, when we manage to control ourselves, we regain our strength. We need to know that an angry person is actually someone very weak, who has no strength of his own, or the ability to self-control. When we are angry, we do not have self-control. There are situations that trigger our anger, and we always fall there fighting, screaming, attacking, and after the disaster, crying or lamenting. A person without anger can handle any situation in a conscious way. We must also observe our impatience, because it is one of the aspects that leads us the most to anger. Impatience builds up in us until it finally explodes. Working on this infradimension, we will regain strength and self-control, and we will develop our willpower. The sixth infradimension is the sphere of Jupiter. Related to our superior emotional center. Jupiter is the generous of the solar system. In opposition to this, in this sphere we find all our tyrannical selves. Tyranny gives, but expects something in return, and does not respect the free will of others. And tyrants often mistake their tyranny for love. They all have something in common, they believe they have the truth, and therefore, they believe that what they do is for the good of the other, imposing their will, their truth, even to the detriment of the other person's will. Like the tyranny towards the couple, that our partner has to act and think as we think they should do. The tyranny with our employees. Tyranny with our children, making them eat what they don't want or don't like to eat, making them study what we think they should study, and not what they want, making them marry who we think is better, etc. We are tyrants with everyone. We want people to think as we think, and to like what we like. We are tyrants when we don't want to allow others to act with free will, and we want people to think as we think, do what we want them to do, believe what we think is true, and so on. Here we find all kinds of dictators. Our tyrant defect will always be looking down to see who we can intimidate, and the more power the tyrant has, the more dangerous. And this defect makes us confuse that with love. That we do it because we love them. But real love is respect, while tyranny is arrogance and selfishness. And we make people's lives hell with our tyranny. To clean this inner infradimension, we must study and eliminate all our tyrant and dictator selves. Those who do not let others say or act with free will. All those who attempt against love and the divine, blasphemers, skeptics, materialists, atheists, etc. In return, we will receive wisdom, and that true love, which is the ability to give without expecting anything in return. The seventh infradimension is the sphere of Saturn. Related to the superior intellectual center. Saturn is in charge of managing nature. In this infradimension we find all crimes against the Holy Spirit, against nature, and all violence against art. We find violence against the Holy Spirit, which is our sexual creative energy, and against art, which is the sexual practice, in our fornication defects, masturbators, homosexuals, lesbians, adulterers. Our defects of lasciviousness, pornography, prostitution, those who practice sex with animals, those who practice anal sex, oral sex, the order homosexuals, the sexual abusers, those who have sex several times a day, those who copulate when the woman is pregnant or menstruating. Those who force themselves to have sex, those who force their partner to have sex when having no desire to do so. The rapists. Those who spill energy outside the temple, those who use contraceptives, those who abort, those who castrate themselves, those who force others to castrate themselves, those who castrate animals, those who do grafts. The eyes of witchcraft, the eyes that criticize, the eyes that slander, etc. We must work on all these defects in order to achieve purity in sex and reach the true practices of suprasex. There is violence against God in the scoundrels of the intellect that deny man the spiritual possibility. Also, we find here the ones that use violence against themselves, the suicides, and the ones who damage or mutilate their bodies, and the one that starve their bodies. We also find here those who are violent against their own property and the property of others. In addition, we must observe our behavior towards our Mother Nature, the damages against the ecology, the contamination of the waters, the air, the earth, the elementals, etc. From here we will rescue all the gifts and powers of the Holy Spirit. The eighth infradimension is the sphere of Uranus. Uranus is related to the force of the Holy Spirit, the sexual creative energy, our Divine Mother. The word itself, the truth. In this sphere, on the contrary, we find all our defects related to lying and forgery, our counterfeiting and fraudulent defects. Here we find all the liars, the counterfeiters, all those who counterfeit religions, counterfeiters of money, imitators, all the incestuous, sowers of discord, the bad advisers, the black magicians who invite others to fornicate. Those who make promises and break their promises, the scandalous, the schismatic, the false, the hypocrites, etc. And all those who twist the truth. To combat this infradimension, we must live in search of the truth. Each lie generates many ties and chains, because a lie requires many other lies to support the first one, and without realizing it, we find ourselves involved in a web of lies from which we cannot get out, and we harm others in the process. We must look at the consequences of lying, look at how it harms others and ourselves, and how it distances us from our inner Christ, which is the truth. The ninth and last infradimension is the sphere of Neptune. We are right now in the sexual apparatus. Here we find all the treacherous selves of our psychology. Each one of our desires, each one of our justifications and washing of hands, and each one of our ill wills, that prefer to do the will of the ego than that of the consciousness. Here is the most terrible flaw of all. It is our treacherous self that has kept us through so many existences without doing the work that we came here to do, the work of self-realization, because we continue betraying our inner being, betraying our own consciousness. When we feel an egoic desire, and we justify ourselves to commit the act of ill will in which we will sell our consciousness to satisfy our ego. For esoteric work we must discover each one of our traitor selves, which manifest throughout the day. And those are the 9 infradimensions. And it is precisely the work we do to discover and eliminate all these defects from within, which is known as self-knowledge. Because by eliminating all the errors within us, by eliminating all our darkness, we will get to know and develop what we really are. From these infradimensions will come the light that illuminates our interior darkness, or the wisdom of evil, and the love that is trapped in those defects. And we will achieve this with the constant practice of psychological death. And well, this has been today's conference. I hope you find it very useful in your self-discovery process. I invite you to the next conference in which we will be talking about our 7 bodies, their characteristics, and how we are going to create them. Don't miss it. See you at the next conference. Bye-bye.